Hi guys. Thanks all of you for joining me in such late hours. I know you're all tired. I know I am. Been up since 7:30 this morning. I hope I'll keep it entertaining, and this is a friendly presentation. It's supposed to be a picture with the Friends cast in the background, but I know you can't see it. My name is Raluca, and I'm going to talk to you about automation today. So first of all, hi guys. How you doing? I'm going to start with a little bit about myself. I've been in the software industry for 10 years. I've been a developer for 6. I've done .NET, C#, a bit of database development, don't tell anyone. And QA for 4. I've done Java, I've done performance testing, I've done automation, I've done a bunch of other things. And currently I'm a delivery manager with Betfair Romania. It's part of the Paddy Power Betfair group. We work mostly in e-commerce, so don't ask me for any betting tips. I don't know any. So basically, when I first joined 6 years ago, the company, there was a bunch of things going on at that time. I joined the back-end team. Basically, our entire architecture is a service-oriented architecture, so a lot of microservices, a lot of teams owning their own little service and doing their own little thing. So Scrum teams, basically, no one will talk to one another. There was this automation team in a corner somewhere that were supposed to do automation, but none of the product guys talked to them. We did like the manual test case, and they were fed by someone with an automation depth project, some cases that they need to automate. When they were done and they supposedly left the company, they said, fine, this is the automation, you now run it. Nobody knew what to do. Not the keys, nothing was working. They wrote it in C#, and mostly the people knew Java, don't know how to maintain it. It was a mess. Basically, it was 6 months worth of effort that got thrown out the window. So basically, all the other teams started then doing their own automation. Everyone was doing bits and pieces. This team did this service, this team did that service, no one would talk to one another. People were copying classes of code from one project to another, and you can imagine the debugging and fixing in Java, all like the package names and everything, like copy and paste, not anything intelligible. And they were doing things like, you need to create your uses for your tests, like SOAP calls, like this big with strings in your automation, because that's how they knew to do stuff. And if a new joiner joined the team, nobody knew where to start from. You had probably multiple services tested in the same test project. You would join a team, do a release, and say, oh, I don't know what test to run. Like the guy who worked on them knew, I don't know what it is. And the release to market was like, we did a release per month. We were like that bad. And they would have to get, I don't know, 500,000 sign-offs just because people were not really confident in what we put out in the market. And basically, a few years ago, this talk about continuous delivery, but how can you do continuous delivery when you don't have automation? And of course, we had lots of defects and lots of stuff. So basically, what we wanted is to achieve more test coverage. So we started doing that just to get this bit for continuous delivery, right? We also wanted to reduce the number of functional defects in production. So we had showstoppers. We did a release, everyone cross your fingers, hope no P1, P2s go into production, break the site for 2 days. Tough luck. Also, we wanted to increase the pace of delivery. Time to market is really a great thing these days, and senior management was not happy that we can do one release a month where we sign off the gold bill 2 weeks in advance and nobody changes anything, and then release management goes through a day of prep just for the release. So with that in mind, basically, we thought, is there a solution for this? Actually, we found one, and no, it's not alcohol, although it helped. But basically, what we did is we started building an in-house framework. It was a collaboration between devs and QAs. When we said, right, all these people write all this bunch of code, that nobody uses and nobody talks to one another. And why not put it in, we said, a QA framework. I know the name sounds not so, but what we said, right, every team needs to create the users, maybe put some money in their balances, maybe create some sessions or log in into the website and whatnot. Everybody needs that. Why have 7 people in 7 different teams work on their own way of creating those kind of utilities when you can have like one big framework for everyone to use? So we started working on that one. Basically, getting that one up was not too big of a deal. You know, we got it started, we wrote it. The more issue was pushing it out to the teams because no one wanted to accept the fact that, right, it's me, I've been in the company for 1 year and I'm coming to you and saying, right, use this bit of code and put it in your tests because I say it's great and you're gonna use it and it's gonna make your life better. So basically, we started implementing in our own team. We had a couple of microservices in our ownership, and when we started them, we always came with automation in mind. When I first joined, I worked for 6 months on a project with just manual testing. And it was a conscious decision just because it was such a project was in such a way that it was not repeatable. So when it was done. So we didn't have to do anything else. But afterwards, when we started working on our microservices, we said, well, these are going to live in production for I don't know how much time. And I need to have something I can run day in and day out. And that's how this framework started. And that's how we started using it in our own components. And then I think also fate kind of said that, right, I worked in the accounts area and everyone needed to create accounts and everyone came to us and kind of said, well, I need to create an account, how do I do it? Use this bit of code, magic happens, you just put it in your dependencies and then you call a method, boom, there's your account. Basically, from then on, when we kind of got the ball rolling, all new projects started with automation in mind, right? So everyone was doing, at first they were like, yeah, we'll do manual testing and automate it if we have time. If we have time never came. Now it's like, yes, I need this bit of time to set up my new automation project. And because it's a framework, it's basically quite easy to do the setup, right? And of course, our releases work faster because of that. One of our biggest issues we had before having this one was that someone said, in what environment user creation doesn't work? Well, I had to go in, manually test it, and see, yeah, well, it works, maybe it doesn't, maybe this case doesn't. With this, works in every environment, we build it in such a way that you just need to parameterize your environment, right? So your endpoints for your services and whatnot. Okay, someone says it doesn't work in the integration environment. Fine, fire it up, maybe I'm missing something, put in the configs, run it. Well, actually, it does work. Maybe you were using it wrong. Another thing we gained from this is that, and I know this sounds, I'm going to contradict myself on that one a bit later, but once automated, it stays automated. Basically, we didn't have neither a repository for actually documenting the manual test cases. So everyone was doing their own thing, and then 6 months later, I don't know what I did. And I remember something Jan said before me, that you could have your auditors, like these could be very important for your auditors saying, fine, if I'm using Javadoc and whatnot in these test cases, this is what I've run, there you go. I don't have to document somewhere where no one touches for 6 months what are the steps of the manual tests. And basically, once we started this initiative of devs and QAs working together on automation framework, we kind of began the feeling of having cross-functional teams, meaning that because we did stuff maybe in the same way and to the automation tests, all the development good practices kind of went in. When we were swamped, developers could actually help us with writing tests. It wasn't such a big deal. They could very easily understand what's there. It was in the same way we use Java with Spring. It was the same things we used in creating our microservices. So it was quite easy for them to help us and actually contribute to the testing effort. Harder, better, faster, stronger. So I said earlier that our strive was for continuous delivery, right? And you know that's important for you not to stay for 3 days to run your tests in a whatever integration environment. So right now, we even have a service that has a suite of tests over 1,000 and runs under 5 minutes. I know I'm talking about API tests at this point and not UI because we all know that those are more brittle and whatnot. But basically, this has helped us. And now, when I first joined, we had a few monoliths and we just started building microservices. Now we have around 200 microservices just in the Cluj location. So basically, if it weren't for that, we couldn't actually push all these microservices on a weekly basis out to production because no one would actually have the time to do all this amount of tests without this library. And actually creating a new microservice and bringing it up to speed, the devs had their own way. They have a framework for that that's based on Jetty, but the QAs had nothing, so they just had to build the utilities all the time. Now they just plug and play. And there's an element of customization for that because, you know, not all teams have the same needs, and those was kind of built in. Fine, someone needs something that's agnostic like a user, just give me a user that I don't care about, nothing about it, not first name, not last name, nothing about it. And other teams might need a level of, yes, I care that his security question is I don't know what answer, that it matches his birthday or passport number is, so on and so forth. So we offered that to the teams. So, you know, it's basically a self-service. You have the methods, you can override them, go and play. Basically, it's not all silver bullets, not all shiny, it's not all great. Tests have bugs too. So it was a couple of, probably a year into using this one. Everything was great, business was booming, product was happy, we were working our time to market, awesome. But then we were launching a new product. We were integrating with a third party that was supposed to verify our customers. Basically, we wrote the automation, everything was great, pushed it to production. A day later said, well, the conversion rates for this are really low, it's about 30%. I was like, well, that couldn't be, maybe we have a bug, but we haven't discovered it. Well, we dig for a couple of days, then we figure out that nobody actually tested the fact that maybe users register with their first name, last name written in all sorts of caps, right? They can, you know, do the first one, maybe, you know, or maybe they have special characters in their name and they get normalized. And when this company actually provided us with a scan of your document and then translated that document into, you know, your first name, your last name, and they would give us those dates in all caps. We never tested that. We just said, create this user, send the document, check that the first name from the user we created with the first name that we sent are the same. Nobody checked for cases. No one checked for capital letters. It's like, seems quite straightforward, but yeah, all our automation worked. All the methods from the framework did random cases, and we never bothered to actually change them and test that one. So also, on the front-end tests, you know, we do a fair bit of front-end automation using Selenium, but those are brittle. We had to write defensive code against Selenium bugs, against, you know, I can't click this button because DOM wouldn't recommend on the DOM. The button actually is there, but it's not in the center, so it's not clickable. So let's write some defensive code against that so my automation doesn't fail all the time and my builds are red. And those kind of got us a bit in trouble in this part. I know, like, oh my God, automation, it's going to solve all our problems. Fine, now, tomorrow, everyone do automation. Magic works. Actually, it's not. It requires you to actually constantly take care of it, develop it, debug it, refactor it. It needs to be moving together with your product. I see, from my point of view, your automated tests are not, it's just another product in your company, but it's a product to test your product. It's not going to do anything else than that. It's not going to see production, sort of, because it does. But it's a product in itself, and it needs to be moving. You can't just write it, throw it away, and come back 6 months later, and it still works, because it doesn't. Something has changed in the meantime. As I mentioned earlier about debugging, so basically we had another instance when, just out of a small error, right? Some people wrote some tests about, testing business exceptions, right? Assert if this, try catch this exception, right? Well, you didn't have, nobody wrote an assert fail or assert false or something else at the end of the test. So if it wouldn't enter your try catch, your test will still be green, but you didn't get an error. And yeah, that got into production a little bit at that point. So it's really important to actually spend time and understand what you're writing and what your code looks like. And at some point, you can even have, like Java exceptions, or your, I don't know, Java, Maven, and Spring don't work together. And then you have to spend a lot of time debugging your tests. And these are skills that you really need to have in order to actually maintain this kind of product. The ugly part. Bad design equals bad tests. Right now, I think, we've started this in, I think, 2012, and still evolving. Basically, at the start, it wasn't as extensible as we wanted it to be. And by the time some other teams had started using it, we started figuring out, well, you see, we have these many builds pushed out. People are still using old code that they shouldn't be using. How can we force them? We have to force them to use new code to benefit our better design that we did all the time, over time. Basically, at the first iterations, like, we just put methods in there in one class, and it became like unreadable, like this long. And basically, when we tried to improve it and extend it, we had to write breaking changes into the framework, which was not helping anybody when we wanted to go and say, well, you need to upgrade this because something has changed in, user creation, and you can't use the old one, you need to use the new one. Well, I'm going to have a breaking change, and all my code is going to go red. Yeah, well, that happens, and also, when you use the framework, I think that was a lesson for everyone in saying that, okay, yes, I'm giving you this framework, but please do your own little design on it. So have a class, call it in a class, not in all your tests. So when something changes, don't have 100 classes that go red at one time just because I've added another parameter to a method. And we kind of learned that the hard way, and you usually learn that before a really big release, when you really need to run your automation. And yeah, well, I need to upgrade, and I need to spend 5 days just making my project compile. Effort is underestimated. For this one, I have like 2 references. One is that we've inherited this, at one point we inherited a service from a team. And the service was in Java, but the tests were in .NET. And we were like, yeah, those are running, we don't know what they do, but we need to refactor them. So we had to actually convince the business to give us a month to rewrite all those 1,000 tests into Java. Because at one point, they would become unmanageable. Yes, we could run them for like 2 or 3, maybe releases, and say, yeah, it's green. I don't know what they do, but it's green. Let's go. But it was hard actually convincing people at the beginning that, yes, we need to spend this time on this so we can bring you value down the line. Yes, this might seem like a wasted effort, but look at all this that's going to bring you at the end. And another thing is that, for example, if you work with third parties, not often do they have like a test environment, or if they do, they don't have test users for earlier cases, or if they do by magic, maybe it doesn't work all the time. So you're basically pushed to use mocks. So if a user story comes and says, well, for this error message from the third party you're integrated, I want you to throw what not exception. for the developers, it's quite easy in terms of effort, right? To say, if this, then throw F. For the tester, it's like, I need to build my mock. I need to mock it in the same way and send it in the same way that the third party would. And then I need to actually do the test for it. So it might seem like a small change, but in terms of testing, maybe it's quite bigger than the actual development effort. And basically, what we've learned from this one is just to try and convince people that all this effort is actually worth. Basically, we come to what we've learned doing all this time. So never be afraid to ask for help. When I joined, I was a developer in the former life, and I was like, well, I want to reuse code because I'm lazy. And I don't want to write 100 lines of code. But I did C#, I did .NET before, so I wasn't familiar with, I studied Java in uni, but I wasn't familiar with all the, bits and pieces and fine things in Java at that point, and I didn't know Spring at all. So I went to a developer and said, well, teach me. Let's do these things better. I think we can do things better, but let's do it together, because at that point, like, developer sat on one side and tester sat like in this little corner and said, we'll do our things on our own way and never talk to the developers. And I was like, well, if your services have a way of integrating between each other in a certain way, why don't we use that way? Why do we use like SOAP UI to do that? Why can't we use your way of doing things? And that kind of got it started for this project. Involved the whole team. And at that point, I talked about the automation team, the separate automation team. And for the business, those benefits, we couldn't see those benefits. They spent 6 months on. And we had to treat this as a whole team as an effort. So you had to convince like the Scrum Master, your manager, your product owner that, right, this is actually needed for us and it's beneficial for us as a team. It's not for me as a tester that I need to, I can just push a button, sit on my desk with my feet up. It's just something that will benefit us all. Planning and designing before. We were quite excited at first when we started, and as I told you, like, this got us into a bit of trouble later on, and we didn't spend enough time thinking and actually planning how we were going to do. In all fairness, we didn't quite see the scale this would bring to the organization, so we thought we're going to do it for ourselves, and then it kind of got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then we made it open source. People who didn't know what we were about tried to write code in it, and were like just rejecting merge requests just because, like, people wouldn't go in and actually search for something. They just wrote a new method. And I was like, but you could extend that one. Why do we need a new method just to pollute the interface? And basically, at this point, we are kind of the gatekeepers of the framework. There's a small group of QAs in the organization who actually are the only ones allowed to write code without merge requests, just because people have gone crazy and they've done their own versions and now they're using it. And basically, we treat it as a service. We have a client list, and we don't give access until someone says, I'm going to use it for this project and whatnot, because we found that over time, like, people would still come to us for errors that they were getting, and we were like, well, you're using 5 versions ago. Why aren't you upgrading? Well, I don't have time. That's like the typical excuse, so I don't have time. And now we kind of pushing them and forcing them to actually upgrade the library. And I've just recently found out that someone has done an improvement, an extension of that one. If it's a Java library, basically you just use it in code. But someone has built a UI on top of it so that everyone has access to actually create stuff in specific environments, just product owners, developers, Scrum Master, they did a nice user interface saying I need to create a test user in an environment with something that has this in the background. So for us, it was quite useful, and right now it is still used and quite useful for all the teams to actually do their work. So basically, that's it from me at this point. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask me. No? Yeah. QA Toolkit, it's not available. It's internal open source just because it's very specific to the organization, and it's just, basically calling some services that create stuff for our internal usage. But actually, the principles I think can be, used for other stuff and used by people to build their own things. Yeah? You in the back? Sorry?
What's the duration of automation tests?
The duration of automation tests now? For backend tests, probably under 5 minutes for all services.
Are they run on the browser or just API testing?
This is API. I'm just talking for API testing. For the browsers, I've seen half an hour, sort of. I think for the bigger projects, it's around half an hour to actually run an automation suite. Yeah. And yeah, it depends on the browser you run it as well. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
How do you get your data? Test data?
We create our test data. So I think this kind of try to solve this test data problem, because people would use users they created 6 months ago in an integration environment that someone else modified, and now they're not working. So each time, so at least that's what we're striving for. I've seen hard-coded users in some, I'm not going to say, I've seen hard-coded users. I know some of the teams really can't, like the payments team doesn't have that amount of car numbers to work with, so they really need to hard-code. They can't just make up a car number out of 16 digits that it would work. But in terms of actually test data for the services, we try and create the users fresh every time. We try to create everything fresh, like the users, the sessions, put money in. So it's just a matter of making it repeatable and not having the problem. For example, if they scrub the database in the integration environment, you don't have a problem, you just run up the tests.
Do the tests clear up that data after themselves?
No, we haven't quite figured out. We would like to do it, but at least in terms of user deletion, because of the structure of the database and the way it's handled currently, if we went in and actually deleted it in the database, we would probably get some inconsistencies because we couldn't find it everywhere. And the services that sit on top haven't exposed the method in doing so because there was no business interest in actually deleting users or sessions or whatnot. We try to clean it up with DB refreshes as often as we can. Maybe more so in dev environments than in pre-production. Yeah, that's the downside. It's a very good question. And yeah, basically now, I think in the integration environment, there are more users that there are in the production database, just because everyone runs automation, like heaps and heaps of users on the same environment. And also the downside on that part is that the service that does user creation has more transactions per second in the integration environment that it actually does in production. Not more, triple. Just because there are so many teams running so much automation on the same environment that just went crazy. Yeah.
Why not database snapshots?
Yeah, we use the database snapshots from production when we do our DB refreshes, but some of the teams are actually opposed to doing, you mean for data creation? I don't, for one, I think the guys who work in, I'm not entirely sure on this one, but I'm gonna speculate a bit. The guys who work in actually betting and whatnot in market management, they have a hard time having information right for the test if they don't actually create it, which is if you would use just users, I think that would be fine, just to use snapshot and that you get yourself up and running. But people use very specific things for, like the markets you bet on or the types of runners and I don't know what not. And they need to actually create everything so they know that their data is, specific, and the tests don't fail because of bad data, they fail because of bad code. Yeah.
You mentioned that it's a QA toolkit you provide for other teams.
Yeah.
Is there any specific framework that you use as the open source framework to generate your actual framework?
Yeah, so we've written it in Java with Spring. So with Spring Framework that we use for config files and stuff like injecting property files from the configs into this. And basically, I think now it's open source. I've mentioned the framework for the dev, it's called Cougar. It's based on Jetty. It's basically a container for your APIs. And what we use is something called, I think it's open source. It's called Cougar clients. So the way in your POM file in Java, you just have a ID tool. It's a Maven plugin that you just generate the methods from the BSIDL, so from the definition of the interface, and now you just integrate it in your tests and you just run it. And they generate Java methods for all the interface, and then you just call it. So that's what we use mainly. So yes, and Maven for building it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, everything is integrated into continuous delivery. Basically, I think regression runs in. So we have like the usual steps. So dev, they run their unit tests, and possibly we run some mock tests on the dev environment. Small sanity mocking. On the QA environment, we run a full regression set, and then again on the integration environment, we run a full regression set on the component. And then we also have a production sanity testing, which is also automated at the API level. And some front ends also have some very small sanity, like login, not user creation, because we don't want to create thousands of test users in production, but retrieving stuff that doesn't actually affect more read-only things more than actually destructive tests in production. So yes, everything is integrated. And also what we kind of did, at least for the APIs, is those little sanity ones for production, we run it every 5 minutes in production, and we get an alert if it doesn't run. And that's kind of our way, besides monitoring, that we monitor production. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What type of framework do you have? Is it module-driven or data-driven? Why did you decide on that?
I think we could say it is module-driven, just because we try to structure it based on functionalities, let's say, for certain things. But yeah, I would say module, but maybe it's a mix. I think we are a bit of a failure on that one, just because we started it so long ago that right now to change it 100% would be to rewrite it from scratch. And we started with what worked for us, and then now we're just building on top of it. But I think a major refactor or rewrite might be in the works, because we have a whole new set of things now that we need to work with, which is actually when Paddy Power and Betfair merged, we got a whole new set of companies and components and whatnot from there. So we have to make everything work together, and we have to cater for both worlds basically now. So that might be in the works, but I would say more module than data-driven. Yeah. 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 Yes. So it's not like we've kind of gone up and said, this is what we rely on, and fine, no one would actually do anything. I think especially for front-end tests, everyone does usability, and you test on devices manually, because you can't actually catch any small things with automation or any usability issues with that one. And also for API testing, like I've seen even in my team, now I manage 2 teams, even in my teams, like people don't always go to automation when they need something, when they want to test something. They still use like their SOAP UIs or their Postman calls, or they you do a curl in, in command line and whatnot, just because, maybe just to start it up and see it's easier just to do. And of course, all the UATs and all the demos are done using, so I don't go to a UAT and run the automation and say to the product owner, fine, look, these have passed. You don't know what they do, but these have passed. You need to, have faith in me. And they still do all the steps manually for UATs, for example. Any more questions? Yeah.
How did you choose your test automation?
I would say that we aim big to have, and I'm putting the air quotes quite large, 100% coverage. We kind of, at the API level, I think you can get pretty close. You definitely can't automate everything, but I think things like, for example, looking into logs, looking into log files. Yes, you can automate it, but is it worth your effort? Yes, you can automate it, but is it worth having it fail because he couldn't go CCH on the machine and actually check the logs, than actually going yourself and checking the logs? And for me, that's not worth the effort of actually implementing. Or we have services with caches, right? And you want to check that, the eviction policy of the cache is correct. Maybe you've put in something. How do you automate that? You can. I think you can. You definitely can, but do you want it? And do you want to have it in your automation test? And maybe it can ruin something else. So we strive to have a good coverage of, happy flows and testing disaster scenarios, but things really specific, or maybe you want to test like a service timeout. You could alter the IP tables from the machine and cut the connection to the other service, but then it would affect all your other tests if by any chance you make them run in parallel, which we kind of did at one point, and then we find out they couldn't. And then we had to refactor them so they could run in parallels, just so we have that 5-minute time to run. Otherwise, it would be massive. Yeah. Anything else? Anyone? Yeah.
So to say the bill is good, like what kind of testing you guys do? Like if a bill wants to go to production,
Yeah.
What testing you guys do, like regression?
Yeah, so we do mocks plus regression plus sanity. Definitely, I think definitely for front ends, people do manual tests on that so they know it's ready. But for back end, it's regression plus sanity, and then we ship it. And yeah, we just kind of, if something big, massively we've overlooked, actually we haven't coded, then yeah, it's going to fail. But otherwise, I think we've pretty much, I don't want to say it's not zero, definitely it's not zero, but we've went from having functional defects into production to now reducing the number. Now we have like, let's say infrastructure or performance bugs into production. Like I know they were there, but they were just covered by the functional ones. Now it's more so the functional bit is working, and now we discover all sorts of things like interaction between components or someone opening too many connections to a service, and that puts the production down. And I think that those were hidden. And I saw over time, like I'm working there for like since 2011, I've seen over time like this has kind of reduced. So we can definitely see the benefit of actually running these. Yeah, anyone? Yeah. What automation tools do we use? So we use Selenium with Selenium Grid for frontend. I know they use, what do they use for mobile? I can't remember what they use for mobile. I'm sorry, I'm not, I work in backend teams, everyone. I'm not too familiar with this. They use something for mobile as well. We use Mockito for mocking. We use, or Java mock or something. We use Java and Maven. We test in G for the API tests. The devs use JUnit. And the guys in frontend also use Cucumber and I think Jasmine as well for the tests. And yeah, if you gonna go on specifics of performance, yeah, we use some things from HP. I think the performance for that one. Yeah. Anyone else? Then I'm going to say thank you, guys. You've been a great audience. Thanks you for all the questions. I think that's the mark of a great presentation, if I do say so myself. And have a round of applause for you guys. Thanks.